It was the morning of March 15, 1889, when the staff at the opulent Belmont Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, began their day like any other. But something was off. The air held a strange stillness. Housekeeper Mary Connors noticed first, room 237, which had been reserved for weeks under the name Miss I.K. Aldridge, hadn't placed a breakfast order. Odd, considering its guest was known for her punctuality and routine. When the door was finally unlocked, it revealed a scene that would haunt the corridors of Newport's elite for generations. The room was perfectly arranged, but eerily still. The silk curtains were drawn tight against the gray light outside, casting the chamber in a velvet gloom. On a small marble table sat two untouched champagne flutes, their golden contents flat, as if waiting for a toast that never came. A faint scent of French perfume lingered in the air, a delicate, haunting trace of its owner. And on the writing desk lay a half-written letter, the ink barely dry, unsigned. Isabella Fairmont was gone. No luggage, no note, no sightings, no carriage called. She had simply vanished, disappeared into the thick March fog, leaving behind only mystery and murmurs. To outsiders, Isabella Fairmont had everything. She was beauty, charm, and influence incarnate, a dazzling jewel in the crown of America's Gilded Age. But to those who truly knew Newport's inner circle, her disappearance wasn't just a missing persons case. It was the cracking of a mask, the beginning of a scandal that would eventually expose the rot beneath the gilded surface of the nation's richest families. Born in 1859 as Isabella Catherine Aldridge, she was the daughter of Cornelius Aldridge, a shipping tycoon who built his fortune trading up and down the eastern seaboard, and Margaret Winslow, a woman from one of Massachusetts Bay Colony's most revered founding families. Isabella embodied the merger of two American ideals, old world bloodlines and new world ambition. In the world of Newport's high society, where a person's pedigree was just as important as their bank account, this made her royalty. She grew up among lace and legacy, learning piano in parlors that smelled of lilac and mahogany, attending salons where politics and poetry danced between sips of imported tea. By her early 20s, she had already been profiled in Boston papers as the Eastern Pearl. Then, in 1878, she married Theodore Fairmont, the stoic and serious heir to a Pennsylvania steel empire. Their union wasn't just a romantic match. It was a social alliance, a consolidation of wealth and status that placed them among the most powerful couples of their era. The pair took up residence at Rosecliff Manor, a sprawling 70-room estate on Newport's famed Bellevue Avenue, complete with imported Italian marble, hand-carved staircases, and gardens tended by a staff of 20. During the summer seasons, Isabella reigned. Her soirees were legendary. Senators, ambassadors, and even European royalty clinked glasses under her chandeliers. Rumor had it that President Chester A. Arthur once delayed his return to Washington just to attend one of her infamous masquerades. The local press couldn't get enough. The Newport Daily News dedicated a full column each week to her, Mrs. Fairmont's Week, which documented everything from her wardrobe to her charitable appearances. But while she smiled for society photographers and hosted operettas on the veranda, trouble stirred beneath the satin and silk. Newport was a place of mirrors and whispers. Appearances were everything, and appearances, as Isabella would learn, could be as sharp as razors. The same people who toasted her beneath chandeliers would later dissect her downfall over brandy and cigars. And the machinery of that downfall was already turning. By the early 1880s, hushed conversations began to follow her. Small things at first, lingering glances with a younger man, a carriage ride taken alone, the kind of intimate laughter that didn't match the polite tone of marriage. Newport's social elite, with their corseted morals and unspoken codes, knew what to look for. And then came Jonathan Pembroke, the architect. Handsome, brilliant, and dangerous in the way only men with secrets can be. Their meeting would ignite a passion that burned too bright for a world built on propriety. It would also unravel everything Isabella had spent her life building. But for now, on that foggy March morning, all the city knew was this: Isabella Fairmont was missing. And with her disappearance, The veil over Newport's most well-protected secrets began to lift. Because no one simply vanishes from a life like hers. Not without a reason. Not without a price. During a committee meeting in the summer of 1884, Isabella Fairmont, Newport's most admired socialite, sat reviewing blueprints for the proposed expansion of Trinity Church, the city's oldest and most prestigious house of worship. It was a simple civic duty, nothing out of the ordinary, until he walked in. Jonathan Pembroke was not the kind of man who went unnoticed. Tall, lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and green eyes that seemed to pierce through pretense. He was an architect with a rising reputation, and a past shrouded in mystery. His voice was smooth, his manners impeccable, but there was a flicker of something dangerous just behind the charm. A quiet intensity, a quiet confidence. And when his eyes met Isabella's across the table, everything changed. What began as professional collaboration quickly turned personal. Isabella, bored of predictable conversations and loveless rituals, was drawn to Pembroke's creative mind and magnetic presence. He saw her not as a social figure, not as a wife, but as a woman, a mind, a fire. He began visiting Rosecliff Manor under the guise of consulting on potential renovations. The servants, ever discreet but keen-eyed, noticed. He would arrive in the afternoons, and he and Isabella would vanish into the gardens for hours, or lock themselves away in her study under the pretense of reviewing plans. Her laugh changed when she was with him, freer, less controlled. She smiled more, wrote more, spoke in poetry again. But passion, no matter how carefully disguised, leaves traces. And in Newport, whispers spread like perfume in the cold air, sweet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Soon, society noticed. Pembroke and Isabella were seen together at the Newport Casino, heads bent close in intimate conversation. She was spotted entering his rented studio on Thames Street without a chaperone. The most damning of all, a maid in the Vanderbilt household claimed to have seen them kiss in the conservatory during a private dinner party. That claim would become the headline. On October 12, 1884, the New York Herald published an explosive exposé under the headline, Newport's Fallen Angel. The piece, written by a columnist known only as The Observer, detailed the affair with surgical cruelty. It cited private letters, financial transfers, and secret meetings. But that wasn't the worst of it. The article revealed that Isabella had given large sums of money to Pembroke, tens of thousands of dollars. It claimed she had begun quietly selling family heirlooms, including priceless artwork and jewelry, to pay off his debts. The scandal was a wildfire. Isabella went from beloved hostess to public disgrace in a matter of days. When Theodore Fairmont, her husband, read the article, his world shattered. Reserved, stoic, and deeply invested in his steel empire, he had long believed his wife's charm was simply a tool to elevate their name. He'd admired Pembroke's talent and had praised Isabella's decision to hire him. But now, that praise felt like a cruel joke. That evening, Theodore confronted Isabella in the library of Rosecliff. The conversation was long and bitter. At first, she denied the affair. But faced with bank records and art sale receipts, her defenses crumbled. She confessed, not with shame, but with fury. She insisted she loved Jonathan, that their marriage had always been a cage, that she had found something real. Theodore offered a way out, end the affair, return to Boston for the winter, and rebuild her reputation. There would be no divorce, no public humiliation, just quiet exile and eventual forgiveness. Isabella refused. She told him she planned to seek a divorce and live openly with Jonathan. It was more than a scandal. It was a declaration of war on the very foundation of Gilded Age society. No respectable woman, especially not one as prominent as Isabella, dared suggest such a thing. To walk away from a marriage, to pursue a man without title or family name, was unthinkable. As her social world collapsed around her, Isabella did not retreat. She walked through town with her head held high. She continued to meet Pembroke, even after her invitation ceased, even after old friends crossed the street to avoid her. She was in love, or perhaps intoxicated by the rebellion of it all. But love, in Newport, was not enough. What she saw as passion, the city saw as scandalous arrogance. And what began as a romance between two people quickly turned into a storm that threatened to consume them both. Because in Newport, sins were never forgiven, they were punished. And Isabella was about to find out just how far the powerful would go to protect their image and silence the truth. Her affair with Jonathan Pembroke had detonated like dynamite in the marble halls of Newport. Once adored and admired, she had become a pariah. Invitations to dinners stopped arriving. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. Whispers trailed her like shadows. But Isabella didn't flinch. She walked through the wreckage of her social life like a queen over battlefield ash. Though publicly disgraced, she still held one priceless weapon, knowledge. And she intended to use it. Behind the scandal of romance and betrayal, something far more dangerous simmered. In the weeks following her public fall, Isabella began to speak privately, first to her maid, then to her attorneys, and finally to her estranged husband, about things Pembroke had revealed to her during their time together. Things about Newport's most powerful men. Things hidden inside their homes. Secret passageways. Concealed rooms. False walls. Safes buried in wine cellars. And in those hidden places, not love letters or gold, but documents. Papers that, if exposed, could bring down dynasties. Jonathan Pembroke, she said, had been commissioned to make these changes. Underneath his charm was the precision of a master manipulator, and the knowledge of where every skeleton was buried. And now Isabella had access to it all. She claimed that Senator William Blackstone kept evidence of political bribery hidden behind a false fireplace. That railroad tycoon Charles Petton used a sub-basement vault to store fraudulent land deeds. And most dangerous of all, that at least 3 Newport families had conspired to fix steel prices during negotiations for government contracts, directly involving her husband, Theodore Fairmont. It wasn't just gossip. Isabella claimed she had documents, blueprints, records, names, and she threatened to expose everything unless a deal was made. Her demands were exact. $100,000 in untraceable cash. All of Pembroke's gambling debts settled quietly. And safe, permanent passage to Europe for both of them. In return, she promised her silence. She wouldn't speak to the press. She wouldn't testify. She would disappear, taking the truth with her. It was blackmail, but it was also self-preservation. Because Isabella understood something chilling. These men wouldn't risk a courtroom. They'd risk a body. And so, a secret meeting was arranged on November 20th, 1884, at the Belmont Hotel, in a private dining room where decisions were usually made over lobster and bourbon, not threats and consequences. Representatives from 5 of the most powerful families in America sat across the table from Isabella Fairmont. The men were older, graying, cloaked in custom-tailored suits. She wore black silk and pearls. She wasn't nervous. She was resolute. For 6 tense hours, they negotiated. She laid out her terms. Her tone was calm, her logic sharp. This wasn't a plea. It was a transaction. They agreed to pay the money, agreed to settle Pembroke's debts. But they had conditions. She and Pembroke would leave separately, never to reunite. They would never return to the United States. And both would sign legal documents agreeing to a lifetime of silence. It was exile, a polite erasure, a rich woman's execution without blood. Isabella agreed. Witnesses recalled that she smiled faintly at the end of the meeting, not out of triumph, but something quieter, something like resignation. When asked if she understood the consequences of what she was agreeing to, she replied simply, "Some sacrifices are worth making for love." On November 25th, she received the payment in her hotel room. The date of her ship's departure was set, December 2nd, out of New York. The steamship Britannica would take her to Europe. Pembroke had already left days earlier, or so she believed. Everything seemed arranged for a discreet exit. But Isabella didn't board that ship, and she never saw Jonathan Pembroke again. What she couldn't know, what no one told her, was that even before her exile began, the walls were already closing in. that her murder was already being planned, and that the very people who had sat politely across from her at that negotiation table were the same ones deciding where to bury her. Because Isabella Fairmont didn't just know too much. She had dared to speak it aloud. Isabella Fairmont had made her move. After being branded a disgrace by newspapers and exiled by society, she no longer begged for forgiveness. She demanded accountability. She claimed she possessed evidence that would destroy some of the most powerful names in Newport. During her affair with Jonathan Pembroke, she said he had revealed secrets about the homes he designed. Hidden compartments, sealed rooms, and underground safes in Newport's most prestigious mansions. These weren't just romantic embellishments. According to Isabella, these architectural oddities were installed at the request of his wealthy clients to hide documents, launder stolen wealth, and shield criminal evidence. Bribery, tax evasion, land fraud, and worse. She approached 5 of Newport's richest families with an ultimatum. $100,000 in cash. Safe passage to Europe. Pembroke's debts paid. In return, she would disappear forever, taking her damning knowledge with her. To the public, Isabella had become a disgraced woman. But in private, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, she was a threat unlike any the elite had ever faced. And so, the deal was made. Or so she believed. The families agreed, but under their terms. She and Pembroke would travel separately, they said, and have no contact for at least 2 years. Legally binding contracts were signed. Paperwork was filed. Departure dates set. It all seemed legitimate. On December 1st, 1889, Isabella checked into the Belmont Hotel under her maiden name, Isabella Catherine Aldridge. Her steamer trunk was packed. Letters were mailed. A carriage was arranged to take her to the docks. She was to board the SS Britannica bound for Europe the following morning. But that night, something changed. She dressed in her finest evening gown, deep sapphire silk, the kind that shimmered under candlelight. Her signature ruby brooch, the one she said belonged to her grandmother, pinned at her throat. She requested a final dinner sent to her room. The hotel manager later said she looked elegant, but solemn. Not frightened, not desperate, just final. At 11:30 p.m., she was seen descending the grand staircase of the Belmont. She nodded politely to the night clerk, declined his offer of assistance, and stepped out into the fog. She was never seen again. When she failed to board the ship the next morning, Theodore Fairmont notified police. Detective Samuel Harrison, a seasoned investigator known for rooting out corruption on the docks, was assigned to the case. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would uncover. Harrison began by retracing Isabella's steps. Interviews with hotel staff revealed she had spent her final days writing letters, visiting places from her past, and even hiring a photographer to take a final portrait, something mournfully symbolic, as if she were capturing her last image before fading from history. But what truly raised suspicion was the lack of follow-through. The money promised for her exile, $100,000, had been transferred into a New York bank account under the name Ike Aldrich. But the account was never touched. The handwriting didn't match hers. Someone had forged the paperwork. Pembroke, too, had vanished, or so they thought. Then came a report from Boston. A man matching his description had died in a boarding house on November 30th, just one day before Isabella's disappearance. Cause of death, heart failure, officially. But witnesses said he had been visited hours before his death by 2 well-dressed men. Isabella never knew. She had walked into the night believing she was going to meet him, or join him, abroad. Then a breakthrough. A former seamstress named Mrs. Margaret Winthrop came forward, claiming to have seen Isabella the night she disappeared. According to her, Isabella met 2 men in the courtyard of the Peton Mansion, one of the homes allegedly harboring architectural secrets. She appeared distressed, but determined. After a heated exchange, she left with them in a closed carriage. Detective Harrison's investigation intensified. Building inspectors uncovered inconsistencies in the mansion's blueprints, especially in the wine cellar. Measurements didn't add up. The walls seemed thicker than necessary. A hidden space was suspected. On Valentine's Day, 1890, investigators broke through a false stone wall behind the racks of imported French wine. Inside, they found a chamber, 10 feet by 10 feet, lead-lined, soundproof. And in the corner, wrapped in a silk evening cloak, lay Isabella Fairmont. She had been poisoned with chloral hydrate, a sedative used by criminals of the time to subdue victims quietly. A half-empty glass of champagne was nearby. But the most chilling evidence? Scratch marks on the walls. She had been alive when placed inside. In her hand was a crumpled, near-destroyed piece of paper, what appeared to be a final note, perhaps naming those responsible. But the writing had faded. The names unreadable. It wasn't an escape plan gone wrong. It wasn't a tragic suicide. It was murder. Premeditated. Calculated. Executed with clinical precision. The room had been built for one purpose only: to silence Isabella Fairmont. The Newport elite had feared exposure. And in the Gilded Age, the most effective way to protect their secrets wasn't discrediting the truth. It was burying it alive. In the spring of 1890, the names of America's most powerful men appeared in arrest records for the first time in history. Steel magnates, senators, bankers. The newspapers called it the beginning of a reckoning. But those headlines faded quickly, buried under bribes, threats, and smoke. Witnesses began to recant. Testimonies that once seemed ironclad suddenly changed. Some claimed they had been mistaken. Others simply vanished. The few brave souls who stood by their statements were harassed, threatened, or driven into silence. Key evidence disappeared from police custody. Official files. Correspondence. Isabella's letters. Gone, without explanation. Then came the fire. The Pinkerton Detective Agency's Boston office, the very firm hired by the elite to surveil and silence Isabella, went up in flames under suspicious circumstances. The blaze destroyed case files, investigator logs, and surveillance records, everything that might have tied the agency to the murder. The case unraveled. Courts delayed hearings. Prosecutors resigned or were reassigned. Federal investigators found themselves mired in legal quicksand. Lawsuits over jurisdiction clogged the dockets for months. The machine of justice, once promising, ground to a halt. And then, the final betrayal. Theodore Fairmont, Isabella's husband, the man who once claimed to want justice for his wife, withdrew his cooperation. His public statement was measured. "I have endured great tragedy. I wish to remember my wife in peace, not continue this spectacle." But behind that carefully crafted grief was a dark truth. Records later revealed that Theodore had been offered a deal: lucrative federal steel contracts, political protection, and a promise to restore the Fairmont family's social standing. In return, he had to say just one word: enough. And so he did. By the end of 1890, the trials had collapsed. Charles Peton walked free. Senator William Blackstone's charges were dismissed. The Pinkerton agents responsible for Isabella's final hours were never seen again. Her death, the silencing of a woman who dared to challenge the powerful, went unpunished. But justice doesn't always follow the law. Over the next 2 decades, those who had conspired against Isabella began to fall. One by one, Charles Peton's steel empire crumbled under the weight of federal fraud investigations. The same fake contracts and price-fixing schemes Isabella had threatened to expose were eventually uncovered by someone else. Bankrupt, disgraced, and haunted by the past, Peton was found dead in his New York mansion in 1897. Official cause: heart failure. But those who knew him whispered of something darker, a ghost in blue, and the overwhelming scent of French perfume that filled the room just before he died. Senator William Blackstone was expelled from Congress in 1892 after documents hidden in his library fireplace were seized by investigators. Exactly as Isabella had claimed. The bribes, the forged deals, all true. He died in poverty, shunned even by his former allies. The others fared no better. Railroad Baron Thomas Hartwell was ruined in the Panic of 1893. Banking heir Robert Sterling lost his fortune and reputation after illegal lending practices were exposed. Another secret Isabella had known. And then there was the brooch, the ruby one Isabella had worn on the night she disappeared. After her body was recovered, it was held as evidence, then eventually returned to Theodore. He donated it to a museum in Boston. But the brooch didn't stay hidden for long. In 1902, it turned up in the belongings of a young New York socialite who died suddenly of apparent suicide. In 1918, during the influenza pandemic, it was found in the jewelry box of a Philadelphia heiress who collapsed at a gala. Every time it reappeared, tragedy followed. The brooch, once a symbol of love, became a haunted artifact, an echo of Isabella's suffering that refused to rest. But Isabella was not done speaking. In 1954, 65 years after her murder, construction workers renovating the basement of the old Belmont Hotel uncovered a sealed envelope, hidden behind a loose brick. Inside, blueprints for the secret rooms Pembroke designed. Letters between powerful families and corrupt officials. Financial records detailing every criminal deal. The signature at the bottom? Ike Aldridge. November 30th, 1889. It was the evidence she had promised. The secrets she had died to protect. Too late for courtrooms. Too late for retribution. But not too late for truth. Today, the documents are housed in the Newport Historical Society, part of a permanent exhibit on the dark side of the Gilded Age. Visitors walk past the displays in silence, past Isabella's final photographs, her note fragments, and the brooch that gleams under glass. Some say they feel a chill. Others report the faint scent of jasmine. A few claim to hear weeping behind the walls. But all leave with the same feeling. That Isabella Fairmont was more than a socialite, more than a scandal. She became a symbol of resistance, of the cost of speaking truth to power. A warning that secrets have consequences, and that even in death, some voices cannot be silenced. She didn't get justice in a courtroom. But in the end, Isabella Fairmont had the last word.